Welcome to our research seminar. Today the presentation will be given by Anna Barsevich, who is a research fellow at the Center for Institutional Studies. So Anna, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much. So let me start. First of all, I'm very glad to see all of you at what I consider to be the last seminar this year. I guess we have quite a few seminars on corruption in a row. So this one is going to be less theoretical and more close to our to the examples which are familiar to all of us, because it is mostly based on corruption in Russian public procurement. Actually, this is the paper of together of myself and Lena. So we are not so new to the public procurement, as you all know, but we are the newcomers to the field of corruption. So this is our first step in this direction, and that's why all your comments and ideas are very, very welcome. So let me start. A few words about motivation and research question. When we started public procurement, every time we tried to do something, we faced the idea of corruption. Like we tried to measure the influence of competition on prices, we faced the corruption. So in ideal case, competition should influence prices in the following way. But in our case, we have the different influence, probably because of corruption. Or, for example, we consider competition, we expect competition to be rather high, but then we look at the data and see that it is very low. Why is that? Probably because of corruption. So every time we try to do something, we face this wall of corruption. So this time we tried to... Что?
Не трогай, не переключайте.
Okay.
Осторожно.
So this time we felt that it's time to do something about this corruption. Moreover, we know that corruption in Russia is quite a huge problem in all the spheres. And in public procurement, we all know a lot of cases. Like everybody knows that there is corruption, but no one knows how to measure it, because it is one thing to know it, and another thing to well, we have nobody to ask, like how can you evaluate the corruption in this public procurement and in that public procurement. Also, all the people involved in these practices, they, I guess, try to remain secret. And there is no data on corruption even for all the Russian regions. Not to say for all the procurements or all the procurers, all the suppliers or something like that. So all these three things together bring us to the question, so is it possible to measure corruption in public procurement at all? And if it is possible, then what is its influence on the results of public procurement? Here I want to make like small letters like in the back of the contract or something like that. Because in the most cases we are not able to distinguish between corruption and efficiency. And what I'm going to speak later is always be the case whether it's corruption, like intentional actions to reach this additional extra profit, or probably it's just the lack of efficiency. But we'll speak about it a bit later. Let me start. Oh, no, it's I cannot start.
Just tap on the touch bar. Yeah, just tap. Should be good.
Okay. Let me start with the ideal case of public procurement. Probably most of you already know that, but still I will repeat. So how the ideal picture of public procurement looks like in the Russian case. So everything starts with procurer. We'll start with procurer who needs some goods for his own production for some public body. First thing he should do, he should go to the firms to find out what is the expected price for these goods he needs. Some firms may respond to his question and send him the price quotations, which is the price this firm is able to supply these goods. He looks at these prices, and based on these prices, he chooses the start price of the auction. Then he uses this price in the call for bids, and also in the call for bids, he places some requirements, some characteristics of the goods he is going to procure. Then he publishes this information on the website. All the firms are able to look at this information, come to the conclusion whether they are interested in this or not. And if they are, they apply to the auction. The competition should be very high because there are a lot of firms, and for some of the procurements, the geographical position of the firm is not very important. So they apply for the competition, and the auction in some, it's not, now it is not important how this auction looks like, but the auction takes place. The procedure is quite clear, so everybody can monitor this auction. And on the basis of this auction, some supplier wins, and it is the most efficient supplier because he can provide these goods, the required goods of required quality at the minimum price. Which is good for all the citizens, which is good for the procurer because he saves these funds for something else. And after that, the contract is signed and the supplier supplies the required good of required quality at the given price. So everything looks very nice. How it happens, not in the ideal world, but in the real world. Some things change. First of all, still the procurer needs the goods. So he comes to the suppliers to set the start price. At this moment, he can, first of all, he can choose the firms he asks this price. For example, he may choose some special firms or choose the firms that actually sell these goods at the higher prices, for example. Moreover, he can change not the minimum price as the benchmark, but the average or even the maximum price of all the quotations. Is it clear? Not really? Not really yet.
I have a short question. Are there any differences between the firms and suppliers?
Well, firms are just firms in the market. Suppliers are the suppliers who, the part of the firms who decided to apply to take part in the auction.
Okay, so basically it's the same agent.
It might be the same agent. Actually, in practice, it is the same agent. But ideally, we would expect that we ask from some firms these price quotations, but then they do not take part in the auction, or they do not expect to take part in the auction. In any case, they do not expect to win it with this price. So if there are a lot of firms, it is better if asked of some firms to send these price quotations, and then other firms come. So when they send us this price quotation, they do not set this price higher to be able to take this.
Basically, suppliers are the sub firms.
Yes. So what happens next? So at the very first stage, the firms, the procurer may send the start price higher than it is possible. Then he may introduce some restrictions to the calls for bids. For example, he may ask for some requirements to the firms that only a few firms, or probably only one firm, is able to be able to fulfill. Yeah, thank you. Then he may, for example, specify the contract duration. Very huge contract should be performed in a very short period of time. Most of the firms won't be able to do that, but some firms who are already getting ready to do that may do that. When the procurer publishes this call for bids, he already may limit the competition. So at the fourth stage, when suppliers apply to bid, the competition is already very low. If it is not that low, that is enough to satisfy the procurer, he may additionally exclude some bidders. Like 4 bidders apply to take part in the auction, but 3 of them are said not to fulfill the certain requirements. For example, they failed to send the required documents, or their license is soon will be finished, so it's not good, or something like that. Some reasons to exclude them from bidding. So when we come to the fifth step, we may face the only supplier in our procedure. So actually, it's not an auction anymore. It's just some procedure of giving the contract to the specified firm more legal in the point of view of the society. Some firm gets the contract, and afterward the contract is performed, but there are also maybe some problems. For example, the goods may be of lower quality than was required or was expected. The firm may pay some kickback to the procurer, or for example, doesn't fulfill any other requirements. In all these cases, we would expect this firm to come over and over again to the same procurer, because it is easier to sustain this kind of relationship in the long run. Let me now come back to a little overview of the literature. So we have, as I said, we are new to this topic. So when we started to work with that, we faced a few questions, like what is corruption, why is it good or bad, and how is it usually measured. So the first 3 questions are very simple. I just put them here just to make sure that we speak about the same thing. So we speak about the corruption when a public official gets some private benefit for some services to the firm. For example, in public procurement, it may be that he receives some money for letting the firm win, or raising the possibility of winning of this firm, or closing his eyes on the poor quality of the goods supplied by this firm. Why corruption is bad? Well, again, there are a lot of works why it is so. I listed quite a few, but in general, we understand that if a firm, if we speak about public procurement, if a firm which is not very efficient wins the contract, then first of all, we waste some public money, which can be used differently and more efficiently. Then we receive the goods which are not of the optimal quality, so the society as a whole also carries some losses. And altogether, for example, as Monte and Papani show, leads to the direct negative effect on the economic growth. The second part of the questions concerns the measurement of corruption. And here we have several possibilities, some of them based on the subjective measures, like the indexes of corruption that are well known, like Transparency International Index or World Bank Index. And they are good because they are calculated for most of the countries for many years now. And they include many sources, so probably they're not biased. But still, in our case, even if we do not pay attention to a lot of critiques, which is sometimes discussed about these indexes, we still face the problem that we do not have these indexes even for Russian regions. There were only a few attempts, but they were not very regular, and all of them are quite long ago, happened quite long ago. Moreover, even at the region level, we can have some differences for different procurers, different types of procurements, and so on. So in our case, it is not very easy to use these indexes. Second option is the attempt to try to use some objective measures. These attempts are usually case specific. They cannot be generalized to all of the countries or all of the even to all of the procurement practices, but still they allow some more specific data, some more detailed data on the corruption. So for for corruption in other spheres, not the public procurement, we'll know some interesting papers by Visman and Miguel and so on. But in public procurement corruption research, there are three different ways to measure the corruption using some indicators. It's first of all based on price differentials, like we compare prices for public procurement in the case where we expect the corruption to be very high, and in the case we expect the corruption to be very low, and look for the differences which provides us some measure of the corruption. The other way is the comparison of inputs and outputs in different spheres. The same thing. We see the inputs, we see the outputs. If there is some gap, then the corruption is present. The higher the gap, the higher the corruption. And the last thing we found in the literature is the measure of the links between business and state and how it influences the results of public procurement. So in any case, we have to somehow we have to adapt these measures to our case, because, as I already said, all of these measures are very specific to the country and to the area of public procurement. So let me return to the table we started with, and this is just the same table. I highlighted the rows where something happens that can indicate the corrupt activities. And let me provide you with some examples, so you would understand better how we can notice that. For example, if we take the second row, when firms provide procurer with price quotations, here we see how it may happen. This is the a little example from the procurement of a new car for the regional court of one of the Russian regions. So to set the start price, they took three price quotations. The first one, which is the highest, was taken just from the website, and it was the website of the automobile dealer who is located in Moscow, so the price is a little bit higher than in the region where the court is located. And there were also two price quotations from two sellers. The seller 2 is in the same region where the court is located, and seller 1 is one of the neighboring regions. So the start price was calculated not as the minimum price, but as the average price. So we see that it made sense to ask for this quotation from the website, because it makes the average price higher. Moreover, there was only one bidder in the auction, and this bidder happened to be the same firm that provided one of the price quotations to the procurer. So what we see that the start price already was higher than it could be, because actually the seller 1 was ready to supply this car for a smaller price. And seller 2, when he knew that he's going to take part in this procedure, he probably was interested in charging the higher price and setting the higher price, because he knew that it would influence his own revenue finally. So this is one of the ways the procurer may influence the outcome. using some not very fair ways of doing that. And then we can look at the third row when the procurer sets some requirements to the sellers, and how he forms this call for bids. And here's another example of another region of procuring the medicine. And there was a huge scandal actually, because the price of this auction was very, very high. And it was separated in a few lots, and some of these lots were very expensive. And in each of these lots, the procurer combined very different medicines and medical equipment and so on. So for any single firm, it would be very difficult to supply this medicine, because it required that he is working in different segments of the market, in different sectors of the market. And only one firm actually in this region was able to fulfill this contract, and this firm actually won the contract, which is not a surprise. Which is a little bit surprising, that the prices that this firm was paid were actually higher than her own prices in other contracts. So if we come back to this stages of procurement and think about actions which the procurer may perform at each stage to get additional profit, we come with this list of six actions. And actually these actions are the actions we try to measure, because each of these actions is well, it's simple and it's clear from the data whether it happened or not. And if we try to if try to look at the procurements, and we would expect that the more of these sections are present for every procurement, the higher is the level of corruption and the less efficient is the result of the procurement. So let us look at the data. It was what we have now is like a trial, yes. So we have only one region and only 413 observations. Each observation is one single procurement of gasoline in this region. So altogether, they make all the public procurements of gasoline in this region in 3 years, from 2011 to 2013. From this data, it is taken from the website of public procurement, where all the procurements are published. We have the characteristics of each procurement, like volume, price, duration of the contract, and so on, the bidders, the seller, and so on. And also, on the basis of this data, we estimate the indicators I mentioned in the previous slide. Also, we have the measure of the relative price, which is taken partly from the government statistics, partly from the same data. What is the relative price? We measure the price of the contract that is procured in regional prices for the same date. If this amount of gasoline was sold at the retail market, how much this contract would cost. And the ratio of this price to the contract price gives us some estimate of the differences in prices of public and private markets. So just the descriptive statistics, it's correlations of this retail price with the indicators I mentioned. In the right column, I put once more the definition of the indicator to remind you what it means. So for each of the indicators, we see that we have, for most of the indicators, we have the positive and significant correlation with the retail relative price. So if these sections are really present in the given procurement, it is likely to lead to higher prices compared to our benchmark. We also have some primary steps. It's ordinary least squares regression, which shows how this relative price depends on the combined corruption index. But probably we should not pay too much attention to that because there is not so many observations right now. But in any case, when we have the low number of bidders, we see that this relation is significant and positive. We also had one more case which is not included in the correlation analysis and regression analysis. It's the fact of repeated interactions. As we pointed out before, if the procurer wants to act in a corrupted way, he is interested in repeated interactions with one single firm. And we looked through the data and tried to take out the cases of such repeated interactions. And here are just a few which looked interesting to us. So the first column is just different procurers, and we see that for some of them, like the first one, he had 29 procedures, and all of these procedures were won by the same seller. And for this seller, it was like a huge part of his contracts. He won for other procurers. And which is more interesting that in all of these cases, most of these cases in this table actually, when the procurer has a repeated interaction with some supplier, he actually does not bother to make start price transparent or efficient. So sometimes he doesn't show how he set the start price at all. Or if he shows, he chooses not the minimum the minimum price from the price quotations as the start price, but the average or the maximum price. So he just doesn't show any calculation of the start price at all. So in all of the cases when procurer has repeated interactions with the supplier, and there are a lot of such cases, he tries to make the start price less efficient and less transparent to others. So to mention some results, what we show, we actually have some measure of corruption which we can use to show how it influences the results of public procurement. What we plan to do, we plan to expand this to more regions and include some specific restrictions the procurer may use. For example, we can quantify this indicator of repeated interactions, and we also have some specific clauses in the contract which we now which we do not know at the moment how to make it to include it in a better way, but still we have some very interesting clauses. For example, when procurer limits the geographical location of supplier, the characteristics of the good which are suitable only for the single supplier, for example, and so on. So that is our plans for the nearest future, and thank you very much, and we are waiting for your questions. Yeah.
The work is very interesting, and I understand that you are at the very, very beginning of your research. But my suggestion would be not only concentrate on the public procurement, but you should also pay attention to private procurement, because there is a problem of the big firms' ownership and administration gap. For instance, that the owner is not the administration, and then there might be a problem of corruption between administration and the firm, supplying firm. Let's say there is a big power station, right? And they're buying some very expensive thing, and some firm goes to the head of purchasing department and say, dude, let's do it in this price, you're gonna have this and I'm gonna have that. And it's not the market price at all. And I believe you will find some interesting stuff.
Yeah, probably. Actually, another interesting thing is to compare actually the private procurements to public procurements, because probably private firms, not in your example, but in general, are more interested in efficiency questions actually. So.
Right, but I would say it will depend on the distance between administration and owners.
Sure. Yeah, of course.
I mean, if you are the owner and you make some administrative things like maybe you're the director or like president of the company.
Yeah, you're right.
Then you will be more efficient. But if you're not, then there is a small.
But the good thing in public procurement is that we have all the data on contracts. For private firms, it would be much more difficult to get this data, because I'm not sure that.
I understand, but there are some sites like B2B or something else, and we hope we can get some data better.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I don't know this topic very well, but I was also wondering about the specific terms of contracts. Sometimes there might be differences in times of delivery, and this might define the price as well. But you mentioned this on your last slide.
Yes.
And yeah, another thing, you mentioned, for example, out of 29 participants, one got the contract, but maybe it is also interesting to look at the groups who compete for the contracts. If they are too small, maybe it is also a sign for corruption, but 29 is...
No, it's
yeah.
probably, I was not very clear about that. So it means that one of the procurers had 29 procedures in the given period of time.
Okay.
And all of these procedures were won by the same supplier. So, if I'm not mistaken, most of them even were not competitive at all. Like he was a single bidder, and so he was the winner. Nobody even wanted to apply, or he was excluded after he applied. That is the case. And about the duration of the contract, it is actually it is twofold, because on the one hand, if I'm a procurer, of course, well, we're speaking about gasoline. It is the certain amount of gasoline which is to be procured through the gasoline stations to the cars of the public bodies. And in this sense, actually, it is not that important whether it's the long duration or the short duration. It's important what is the volume per day that is expected from this supplier. So the question of interest is if it is very short. For example, we procure a huge amount of gasoline in 5 days. Then it usually means that actually this supplier is already fulfilling the contract, and there is no competition at all. So in any case, even if some suppliers show up, they will be excluded later, like that.
Can you mention the other reasons which might explain the behavior of, say, procurer? Why would she settle the average or higher price of the goods, except for corruption? What could
it's a good question. Actually, the first thing I want to say is if it would be only the choosing of higher prices to set the start price, probably it's not the problem. For example, we choose the higher prices, but we do not limit the competition. A lot of firms come, they compete during the auction, so the price anyway goes lower than it was set in the beginning. So it makes the problem, when we set the high price in the beginning, it makes the problem if we do not expect to have any competition, because then this high price will remain in the contract and will be the contract price. So probably there are some other explanations. For example, probably he wants to be sure that some firms will be willing to participate in the procedure even if the conditions change somehow, for example. But that is why we make several indicators. Like one indicator in itself is not very important, but when all of them are valid, then it may mean anything. So probably it's not the corruption, as I said in the beginning. Probably it's just his inability to make some efficient actions. But that is the problem.
Another suggestion that comes to my mind would be you should consider procurement of different types of goods. I mean, durables and non-durables, because there is a big difference in buying tomatoes or fish, and another thing buying some iron stuff.
Construction.
Yeah, for construction parts for the car, and there is much more time to find for the suppliers to find very cheap things. And the supply is not 20% to show for gasoline, but 200 and 300%. It might have much more striking effect on the economy.
It's a good idea, actually, but our point is the following. Correct me if I'm wrong. So first of all, gasoline actually is quite a simple good, and it is not very important. I mean, it's not construction. We all know that corruption in construction is very big, but in gasoline, it is not expected to be very big. If we see some of the cases, even in the gasoline, then in other spheres, when it is more difficult to calculate, it will be even higher. This is the first point. The second point is actually why we are looking at the gasoline market. It's not very good to say that, but in some sense, we're looking at the place where it is light, because gasoline is a standardized good. So we can compare different contracts, and the difference in the contracts will be only in the volume of the gasoline. All the rest is almost the same. Like the quality of gasoline is almost the same. The how it is supplied through gasoline stations is the same. So the costs are more or less the same. It's not the same thing if we speak about the construction, for example, because we see the price of the contract, but we cannot know what is hidden behind this price.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, it depends on the purpose. If you want just to show that there is a corruption, because it is a good example. But if you want to calculate the actual volume of corruption
in public procurement, then yes, of course we should look.
Yeah. You should think about differentiating somehow durables, non-durables.
Yeah, you're right, of course.
Can I have a clarifying question? Can we get back to the list of indicators?
Oh.
So what's the problem with number 2 if there is a firm who sent the lowest quotation and then participated? So the initial quote was the lowest one, so then it participated. Why? There was sort of corruption there?
It is not. I don't remember exactly. Have we calculated this indicator only for the procurements where the rule was not the minimum price?
No, the idea was, as you said earlier, that each indication usually doesn't actually mean that there is corruption. It means that there could be something wrong. And this indicator works only with the first one when the rule was not the minimum price.
I'm explaining in the following way. Like, if I'm a firm and I know that the procurer asks me to send the price quotation, I have an incentive to set it higher, because if I'm expecting to take part in this procedure and then to win it. Because if I set it higher now, then the start price will be higher, and then I win the contract and I get the higher revenue. That is the idea. Actually, probably there are some cases when I set the minimum price, and even if the average, for example, procurement chose the average price, and I set the minimum and I won it using this price. But as far as I remember, there were no such cases in this database.
What I mean is that if you take this single indicator and
yeah, but that's what Lena said.
Your perfect world, it will work perfectly there. So.
But that's what Lena said, and probably we should mention it.
Them in the index.
Yes.
It should be at least
yes.
to some degree.
Mm-hmm.
definition of corruption?
Uh-huh.
So it's a misuse of public office.
Mhm.
In your example with the firm, it's not actually corruption, it's a fraud in the way as you say it. So the firm has an intention to set a higher price because she wants some profits. The higher profits, the better for the firm, but it's a fraud in a legal body, but it's not a corruption because we don't see anything from the public office.
Yeah, you're right.
We see misuse of power.
But it is in the the procurer who makes the decision how to set the start price, who is going to participate in the procedure, and so on and so on. He may influence these facts. Like for example, he may choose the minimum price rule that will limit this effect. Of course, in this example you gave, in this example I gave, both of them act. One of them is corrupt, another one is using the legal rules in his own benefit, to his own benefit. But it is still we start all this process from the procurer. He makes the rules, he makes the restrictions, he governs all this procedure, and he signs the contract with the suppliers. So if he is not acting like this in this way, then he finds a way to limit these cases, like not to let the inefficient firm win the contract, as I see that.
I guess the possible answer is that all in all it's the misuse of public funds, so to this respect it's somehow the misuse.
Also this one, yes.
Yeah.
But I mean that it is the misuse of public funds, but it is also from the, probably silent consent, but usually it is not, silent consent of the procurer.
And what about the number of suppliers of gasoline in one region, for example, one town? Are there many of them, or are they not that many? Because, for example, I use mobile phone, and there are not so many providers of services. And I'm wondering, what about the gasoline?
I see. No, it depends on the region actually, and it is more the question on these specific clauses the procurer may include in the contract and in the call for bids. As a rule, there are quite a lot of them, like 3, 5, 10. There are enough providers to compete in some sense. But it is also what we haven't done yet, but what we plan to do is the procurer may include some clauses in the contract that will make it impossible for some of the suppliers to take part in the auction. That will limit the competition also. But in the beginning, if you just take some broad territory and look at all the gasoline stations, different gasoline stations, there will be quite a lot of them. Even in this region, which is not very good in this sense.
For example, in this region, you have around 20 unique suppliers
Yes.
who compete, but you never face them all together in one proceeding.
Mm-hmm. I don't know.
I have several comments on corruption indicators. As far as calculation of prices is concerned, in some state corporations there are special documents, methodologies, which require procurers to count average prices. I know that this system works in Rosatom Corporation. So it's not necessarily an indicator of corruption when procurer calculate average price than the lowest one. Also, I wanted to say that it's normal for procurers to interact repeatedly with the same supplier, because if the supplier proved to be honest and efficient in previous interactions, it's quite possible that in the future you will be just eager to continue interaction with you, not because of corruption, but also because it's not necessarily for you to, let's say, examine his documentation. You know, there are some requirements for procurers to ask documents of beneficiaries of the companies and to make special reports to the government, just to prove that you don't interact with corrupted suppliers. And it's just easier, more time-saving for procurer to interact with the same supplier again. And I would also recommend, not recommend, but just suggest that probably the best way to indicate corruption for sure is just to first to compare market prices with contract prices in public procurements, and secondly is to learn somehow as much as possible the market structure of the procured good, just to know whether it was possible for someone else to supply the same good.
Okay, thank you very much. So let me comment a little bit on your last, starting from the last question. Actually, that's what we do, or anyway plan to do. We compare market prices to contract prices, and we plan to take account of the market structure and somehow to integrate it here. What's concerning the interaction, probably it is really more convenient to procure to interact with the same supplier all the time, and that doesn't mean corruption necessary. But according to the law, it's not that easy. Like, even if you like this supplier the previous time he supplied you gasoline, you're not allowed just to take this supplier again and say, okay, let me cooperate with you forever. Anyway, you have to make this procedure to publish call for bids, and then it is every chance that other supplier will do, because in this case you do not need any specific investment or something else that will make the previous supplier in a more profitable position than the newcomer. So of course the procurer would be probably more happy if he see the same supplier the next time he procures the gasoline, but if it happens 29 times in a row, probably something is wrong. Probably they're not doing something wrong, probably it's okay, but again,
it's market structure.
Probably it is. And what's concerning the average price, start price and so on, probably the average is not bad, but there are some cases also when he took the maximum price as the start price, so which is evidently not very good. Probably I should combine your comment and Masha's comment, which was before, that we should look at the first two indicators together. Like, we choose the maximum price, average price, and in the same time we have this firm who make this price quote participating and winning the contract. Then it is more speaking of something wrong. Yeah, Maxim.
Just a comment. It concerns a lot of times contracting. There's nothing wrong because there's such thing as specific investment. So if one firm does some work for the procurer, it invests in the specific activities, and during the next auction, it gains some market advantages because it has some specific activities and can provide some goods with these advantages. So there's nothing wrong if one firm continues to deal with the procurer many times because it has advantages.
Yeah, you're right. Of course, and it's a common case that if you made some specific investment, then next time you'll have some advantage. But my idea is that in supplying gasoline through gasoline stations, you do not make any specific investment. Probably I'm wrong, then tell me what is the specific investment in this case. But I cannot see any, like at the first glance, even in the second, because you are just the gasoline station or the firm that has several gasoline stations. It does not build the new gasoline stations to fulfill the needs of the same certain procurer. I usually do not do that. You have some network of gasoline stations. And if you see that the location of the gasoline stations is convenient to the procurer and it corresponds to his needs, then you apply and you participate and you win or not win the contract.
But what about the reputation and some other things that allows to minimize the transaction costs? It can also be interpreted as specific investments.
Again, it can be, but you cannot use it to increase your chances to win the public procurement procedure.
Why not?
According to the law. So when the procurer chooses the supplier to supply the gasoline, he can only use. So the suppliers compete only on their prices. They cannot gain some additional score by saying, I won this contract before, or I have a good reputation, or something like that. He cannot participate if he has a very bad reputation, that is true. But I know
it's probably the matter of the competence. So if there is another type of a customer the company can deal with, it is a competence, a kind of a competence of the company. It is the capability to deal well with wholesale or with, I don't know, retail, and public public market is another competence to business policy.
yeah, but still there are quite a few firms that deal with public buyers, and the process itself is not different from giving gasoline to you as a private buyer. Like the certain car comes to your gasoline station, you fill in the tank, and it leaves. So the only difference is in how it pays for that. The technological process is the same.
You could have some specific investment in big quantity contracts. It's the only example that I can have in mind, but they are not so widespread and common in this region to say that it is the case.
Yeah, but I can hardly imagine a situation that you buy additional storage place for the gasoline to be able to fulfill some needs of the big customer.
No, you need a contract with your own dealer who is going to supply you. If you are not vertically integrated firm,
of course.
that's why all vertically integrated firms have some
if you are
advantage in public procurement
yeah.
because they could adjust for the volume easily.
If you are not, then you do not take part in this thing. You are not likely to increase or to make this to become vertically integrated after that, to do that.
I would suggest you to just to calculate all associated, for example, social costs or transaction costs in this example and concentrate your attention on this example and this procedure. So I think maybe it will be good to compare this example with other examples, for example, in Europe, just to make a matrix of, let's say, total social costs and the component of transaction costs, and maybe it's better. And after that, you may tell about corruption, because, for example, if transaction costs are high, you may suspect corruption. Just try to identify material nature of corruption, and after that, you will try to calculate all social costs, and it will be very interesting for example, for new institutional economists. I remember some schools in new institutional economics, and they are very happy to see some specific examples and transaction costs and social costs. To see this big matrix, and it's very good. Very interesting.
In mean transaction costs, what is lost due to this inefficiency in the process?
With this procedure,
Mm-hmm.
you can compare transaction costs in this example, for example, with potential transaction costs in such example in Europe, for example. With public procurement is yes or no.
Good example, because transaction costs, when you have problems with the independent code, are higher than transaction costs when you have the independent code. And in the situation without the independent code, you must include the risks in the price. So the price will be higher. And if you have some specific experience of realizing the project with the procurer, then you maybe believe that the contract will end successfully, and you will lower the price because the transaction cost will be low. So that's what I meant by the specific investments in such a way.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to add some words to my previous comment. Once again about price calculations. I think you should track the changes of procurement legislation for the last several years. Because if you consider gasoline procurements of 2010, you'll see fewer price offers which are used to calculate tender prices. Then the amount of price offers in procurements of 2012 and 2013. Probably there were some restrictions. So the procurers just started to ask for more price offers.
That's why we do not include 2010 in our analysis. And we checked that the procurements we take, all the procurements we study were procured in the period when procurers were already obliged to make these calculations of their stock price. Any more questions? Okay, then thank you very much for coming. We'll try to work on that and make it better. Thank you.